Hey everybody, so glad to be able to be with you again today as we gather as one church all over the place here at home, whether you're in your home or you're outside or you're in your car, wherever you are. So glad that you're joining us today. We're starting a new series this week, and this whole month we want to talk about purpose. We're calling our series Life on Point, and we want you to be able to live the life that you were created to live, and we want really to live the life that God created you to live. You know, it's been said that the two most important days in your life are, first of all, the day you were born, and then the second day is the day you found out why. And in understanding that you were created for a purpose, that God had a purpose in mind when He created you, so as a result of that, He gave you the gifts and the talents and the abilities to fulfill that purpose. But it's important to know that purpose. So this month we want to talk about living life with a purpose, living life on point. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. I hope you get a lot out of it as we talk through some of those things this month. The verse that I want to refer right from the beginning is Romans chapter 8, verse 28 to verse 30. If you want to follow along, I'm reading the New Living Translation. It says, "We know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose for them. For God knew His people in advance, and He chose them to become like His Son, so that His Son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And having chosen them, He called them to come to Him, and having called them, He gave them right standing with Himself. And having given them right standing, He gave them His glory." I want to just kind of particularly emphasize, just pay special attention to that little part of that line. He says, God called them according to His purpose for them. You have a purpose. You were created with a purpose. You do not have a meaningless life. You have a life full of meaning, and we want you to live that life to the fullest of what God has created you for, what God has designed you for, and what God's called you for. But it involves in order to do that, though, we have to get into cooperation with God. There's some things that are helpful and some beneficial things that help us to become who God created us to be. So it's enough to know. So we need to know, first of all, that we have a purpose, and we're going to be talking about that during the month. I want to talk today, though, specifically about one of the ways in which we move ourselves towards fulfilling the purpose that God has for us. It's not just enough to know that we have a purpose, but it's very important that we move ourselves towards the purpose that God has for us, that we actively engage in becoming the people God created us to be. Part of our mission as a church is to bring people from outside the church, bring them inside, and then help them become who they were created to be, who they were born to be. And that's really important, but we have to, as individuals, we need to actively engage in the purpose that God has for us, engage in becoming who God created us to be. And there's some important things that we can do to become that way. And I want to take you in Scripture, I want to take you to, in the Bible, I want to take you to another few verses actually, where Paul, one of the early church leaders, talks very specifically about pursuing what God created us to be. And in Philippians chapter 3, beginning at verse 12 down to verse 16, you can follow along, and hopefully it's on the screen right now. Here's what Paul says as he talks to us about our life's purpose. And he says, "I don't mean to say that I have already achieved these things or that I've already reached perfection." He's saying that he hasn't already become everything he was created to be. He hasn't fulfilled all the purpose that God has in his life. But he says, "But I press on to possess that perfection for which Christ first possessed me. No, dear brothers and sisters, I haven't achieved it, but I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. Let all who are spiritually mature agree on these things. If you disagree at some point, I believe God will make it plain. But we must all hold on to the progress we've already made." Today, I want to talk to you about where's the finish line. I want to ask you today, where is the finish line in your life? What are you working towards? What is your goal? Where are you going in life? What are you trying to achieve? We've gone through these last 2.5 months of COVID-19 pandemic, and it has really disrupted our life in so many ways. In so many ways, we've had time to think, we've had more times on our hand, and many things have been magnified. Many things in our life that we didn't even realize were there, relational difficulties, racism, all of these kinds of things have now been magnified in our life. But in order to change something, in order to become more conformed to what God wants us to be, we need to know where we're going. We need to we need to have a goal to achieve that. So Paul talks about this and he says, I'm forgetting the past and I'm pressing on to that goal, to that finish line. He says, I know where I'm going, and even though I'm not there yet, I know where I'm going. I want to give you a statement. If you're writing notes right now, I'd like you to write this statement down because I think it's important. The fuel of our faith, or the fuel of faith, is your ability to see a goal. The fuel of faith is your ability to see a goal. If we don't see a goal, if we don't see an end result, if we don't see something we're working for, we actually have nothing in which to engage our faith. To put it another way, faith is not effective unless it's applied to a goal. Unless you know what you're applying it to, faith is never effective. It never accomplishes anything because you don't apply it to something. You know, when I first became a believer, when God came into my life, when Jesus changed my life, He gave me faith to believe that He would do something in my life. He gave me faith to believe that my relationship with Him would be restored. And that faith, I applied it. God gave me this faith to believe, and I applied it to a goal of having a relationship with Jesus. I continue to apply to that, my faith, to a goal of having a relationship with Jesus Christ. Because without a goal, faith has nothing to be applied to. So Paul talks about these different phases in our life, these kind of different areas in our life, these different time frames in our life and how we treat them. I'm just going to go through them really quickly as we talk about goals today. He talks about where I was. He says, you know, my past. There's a lot of us that have a past. In fact, we all have a past. Where we were, what we haven't accomplished, what's happened before. And Paul says, our stance and our way to look at that in relation to our goals is simply to forget the past. What you did in the past, what's happened in the past, no longer applies to our goals in the future. The fact that you didn't succeed before, the fact that maybe you've been trying to conquer something in your life, maybe there's an addiction or there's a habit that you were trying to change and you haven't been successful in the past. And Paul says in order to get our future goals, what we need to do is we need to forget those failures, forget it. So right now, where you are, and you're thinking about some of the things you're trying to achieve in your life, some characters you're trying to change, some finances you're trying to change, some things you're trying to change, forget your failed attempts. Forget about it. They just are not important. Paul says we have to intentionally forget about it. The second thing he says where I am, talks about this stage in life where I am right now. So where I am, he says, I acknowledge that. And right at the very beginning, he says, I don't mean to say that I've already achieved. He's just saying, I acknowledge where I am right now in our life. Taking a full account, taking an understanding of where I am. Well, you know what, I'm not doing really well in this situation. It surprises me how often when we are honest with ourselves about where we are, it becomes a platform for us to launch into who we'll become. If we're not honest about who we are, we can never become who God created us to be. If we're not honest about our failings and not honest about our failures and not authentic about who we really are, we can never become who God created us to be because we're just hanging on to an illusion. We're hanging on to a denial. I think so many of the events of the last few days and really the last few months have been trying to acknowledge what's really going on in our life and what's really going on in our society and being able to say, okay, honestly, let's talk about this. Let's realize that there are some things and acknowledge where we are because we have to acknowledge where I am in order to go into the future. The third phase or the third kind of area of life that Paul talks about is he talks about where I'm going. So we have where I am when we forget that and where I'm coming from or where I was, we need to forget that. Where I am, we need to acknowledge it and we need to praise it. But where I'm going, we need to plan for it. Appraisal without a plan results in no change. And we want our life to grow, we want our life to change. And I want, even a week or 2 weeks from now, I want my life to be more like the life God created me to live than the life I've been living. I want to become more like the image that God has for me. I want to achieve and I want to push in and I want to press into the goal that God has for me more now than ever before. So we do that. So I want to ask you some things today as we're going forward because one of the key things in order to become who God created us to be is having some goals, knowing where I'm going. I said earlier, and I'm going to repeat it again. I said the fuel of faith is your ability to see a goal. So when you have a goal, then you suddenly have an ability, or you have the faith, you have the possibility of applying that faith towards that goal and saying, okay, this is what I want to be. I want to be a person who's kind to kind. I want to be a person who's generous, or one of those things. And when we begin to define it, then we can apply our faith to that. I'm going to give you just two quick things today in these last few minutes that we need to consider when it comes to becoming the person God created us to be and understanding our finish line. The first one is this, is we need to have a plan. You know, without a plan, nothing's accomplished in our life. I don't know about you, but for me, when I wake up in the morning, if I have no plan for my day, I can generally understand that very little is going to get done. When I have a plan for my day, then I begin to get some things done. And it's no different in our life. If we don't have a plan for our life, if we don't have a plan for how we're going to change some things that we want to change, if we don't want to have a plan for how we're going to accomplish the purpose God called us for, we'll never accomplish it. Plan is a really important thing. In Proverbs, Solomon, the great orator of wisdom, states these things. He says in Proverbs 21:5, he says, good planning and hard work lead to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty. The idea of having a plan is sometimes difficult, but a plan is made up of a series of goals. And so today I really want to ask you and say, what is your goal in your life? What are some of your personal goals that you want to see in your life? How do you want your life to become more conformed to what God designed you to be? Are there some areas of health that you want to change, where you have a goal and you say, hey, this is my goal that I'm going to push forward into? A few years ago, and I got on and many of you know, I was on a program through university to help me deal with some blood sugar levels. But one of the key components of change for me was setting goals. That along the way, I would have goals. And it's not just a long-term goal. When you're running a long race, it's not just knowing that, you know, here's the end of the race, here's the finish line. I also need to know where the 1 mile marker or the 1 kilometer marker is. I need to know where the 2 kilometer marker is. I need to know where the 3 kilometer marker is. And we need to have some kind of milestones, some intermediate goals along the way, and saying, hey, I wanted to lose some weight, I wanted to exercise a certain amount, all those kinds of things, but I set some goals along the way, because once I had a goal in front of me, then I could apply my faith to it, and then I could go, okay, I can focus on that goal, I can believe for that goal, and I can push into that goal. Maybe you're dealing with an issue of anger, and you're saying, hey, these are the kinds of situations that cause me to be angry. And so my goal in this situation, and so you begin to look at it, and begin to think about it and say, okay, this is the kind of situation where I get angry. And in that situation, this is my goal. My goal is that when I start to feel that anger coming up, I'm going to think of the fact that God's with me and God's got things in control. And so my goal, my immediate goal is when I feel that anger coming up, I am going to think of something different. And when you do that, then you can apply faith to it, because it's a plan. You have a plan. A few years ago, I remember hearing a story of a missionary who I knew, he said he had been waking up quite often thinking about what would I do if I was on the road, and he was a missionary in India. He said, what would I do if I was in a car on the road, walking down the road, and a car came straight towards me? And you know, it's kind of an odd thing to be thinking about, but you got to believe that God prepares us for some stuff. So he started thinking, he said, well, if a car was coming right down the road towards me and trying to run me down, I would kind of jump this way, or I would jump this direction, or, you know, whatever his plan was. But he had this plan, and it was only a few days later that he was walking down the road, and all of a sudden this car came running straight towards him. But because he had a plan, because he had a goal, he jumped and he was uninjured. Now, I think God probably prepared him for that. I think there might have been a bit of divine intuition, so to speak, that happened there. But it's exactly the same thing in the whole area of our life. There's some things we want to change. There's some things that we want to do differently, and God's preparing us, but we have to set a goal and a plan. If you have a plan, you'll change it because you can apply your faith to it. So good planning and hard work lead to prosperity. Let's have a plan. The second thing, and these are the two things I want you to take away today as we work towards the finish line, as we become the people God created us to be, as we talk about goals. So a plan, we have a goal. We're going to work towards a goal. But the second thing, and this is really important, here's what Paul says. Again, in the last verse I read at the beginning, in verse 16, Philippians chapter 3, the last statement, he says, we must hold on to the progress we've already made. Hold on to the progress we've already made. You know, you can't hold on to progress if you don't know where you are. With every goal, you need to be able to measure how you are progressing towards that. And we need to get really candid in our personal lives, and I think we need to get really candid in where we're trying to go with things and saying, okay, I'm getting ahead. Sometimes it's been said that I can move anything I measure. I can change anything I measure. And if you are measuring your progress, then you can hang on to the progress you've made. If you're not measuring your progress, you won't hang on to it. You won't hang on to it. So I want to encourage you today, okay, set a goal, set a plan. Now I'm hoping and believing that there's some things that God's been speaking to you about, whether that's in relation to social justice, whether that's in relation to personal life, whether that's relation to finances, whatever it's in relation to, that God's been speaking to you about a change. And that today, that you would think about specifically and exactly some goals that you have in making that change. And then you would begin to think about, how am I going to hang on to that progress? I'll tell you one thing, that during this time of isolation, and of course I haven't been able to go to our gym for now 3 months, and more than 3 months, and it's been quite frustrating, but I've been able to hang on to it because I've continued to measure the same things. I've been able to hang on to the progress I made because I'm not going to let go of it, because I can continue to hang on to it, because by measuring and hanging on to the progress, I can change my methods to accomplish the goal. My challenge to you today is, what are you trying to change in your life? How are you trying to get more conformed to God's purpose for you, God's plan for you in this time? This isn't just about feel good. This isn't just about do, but this real change in our life. God has given us an opportunity to change, and I'm challenging you. This is a challenge. I'm laying down the gauntlet. Set a goal and figure out how to measure it so that you can become more like God created you to be. Hey, my prayer for you today is that not only during this time, and of course as things begin to relax in the restrictions, we're going to feel like it's over, but if we don't have a goal, we won't continue to change. So hang on to the progress you've made. Set some new goals. Let's become who God created us to be. Let me pray for you today before I turn the service, or turn it back over to the next part of the service. Father, right now I pray for every person listening today, watching today. God, I pray that there would be a feel, a sense, God, of wanting to change, God, but wanting to change in a practical way, setting some goals, setting some markers, some progress, so we know how to change, and we can hang on to the progress we're making. God, I just pray there just be a little thought in our heart. God, just a little thought in our heart, Father, even right now, God, that we'd realize the fuel of our faith is our ability to see and to set a goal. God, help us to set goals so that we can apply our faith, and you can work with us to become who you created us to be. In Jesus' name, amen.